Welcome to another episode of the Chat with Selassie. I'm sitting down with the wonderful Candice Daniel to discuss a topic that is close to our hearts: childhood. We'll be opening up about our own experiences, reflecting on the moment that shaped us, lessons we've learned, and exploring how our early years continues to influence who we are today. Whether your childhood was filled with joy, challenges, or a mixture of both, this discussion is all about understanding our past and finding the growth in our journeys. Let's get started. All right, Candice. I'm so excited for this topic. Our childhood, right? It plays a very pivotal role even in our adults' lives, right? And it continues to show up in different ways. So thank you for saying yes to talk about this, because I know it could be such a vulnerable place to go to, especially if all your stories from those early years is not all like yay,
Yeah.
which I feel like it's not always like that.
Mhm.
There are ups and downs.
Mhm.
Charlie, so tell me, where did Candice grow up? Which neighborhood? What state?
So I grew up in, well, it's complicated, but I grew up in
You
Newport.
see, that's I love it already. I love it already. Let's start. Let's peel it off.
So when people ask where I'm from, originally I'm from Newport News, Virginia. I grew up in Newport News. I went to high school. I graduated from Newport News, Virginia. But spent a lot of my time split between Newport News and Norfolk because my father lives in Norfolk and my family is also in Norfolk. So even though I went to high school or went to school at Newport News and graduated, I also spent a lot of time in Norfolk, and I actually went to college in Norfolk. And before I moved here to Georgia, that's where I was living. But I feel like both places have a big role into who I am. So it's hard to say. People are like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I Newport News," but so yeah, it's complicated.
How
But
old were you when you were in Newport News?
I was like from birth until 21. Yeah, I moved here when I was 21
Wait, and so you were in between Newport News and
in Norfolk. Yeah, my whole life. Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
so
because
yeah, it will be hard to say
yeah.
where you're from.
Yeah, but I went to high school. I went to school in Newport News. I graduated from
But you
Newport
went to
News
college.
in Norfolk.
How far are they from each
They're
other?
about 30 minutes away from each other. So yeah.
Well, girl, you are from both.
Right. Yeah, I'm from both. Yeah. And
You're
depending
from
on
both.
where how I feel, you'll pick up which
Yeah.
side I'm from.
I love that. But you grew up in
Newport
Newport
News.
News. Okay, how was life there like growing up?
Um, it was interesting. It was good for the most part. Newport News is a very interesting place. I feel like every city you have your areas. So I grew up in a part called Midtown, Newport News. So it was like middle class. So it was, like I said, very middle class. So I grew up in that area. So it was nice. I feel like it helped me have exposure to being around all different types of cultures, people. And I feel like growing up in Newport News in that area specifically, it just helps me as an adult navigate any room that I'm in because I just grew up around so many different types of people, and I just learned how to like conversate with whoever I'm talking to, and not really get stuck to like a certain demographic or things of that nature. I feel like it just allowed me to
Mm,
be open minded with just connecting with people.
mm, I love that. So was it a specific race dominated, or was it just everybody?
No,
And
I,
then,
I feel like it was like a good mixture. Yeah, it was a good
mm,
mixture. I feel like it was mostly like black and white. Like
mhm.
I didn't grow up around like a lot of Latinos, or like Asians. But for the most part, we just had like a good melting pot. But it wasn't primarily one culture or the other. It was a good mixture.
Hmm. What are some of the fun memories from your childhood?
Um, I would say so. I lived in Midtown, so the area is called Beach Lake. So it was like a bunch of like kids from my school. We would just like go hang out. Like I was the introverted child. I still kind of am. So like they would come knock on my door and force me to come outside, and we'll just like walk around the whole area, and we'll just get into whatever. Like go to the basketball courts, go to the mountain, like not mountain, but like a little hill, and just chill out, lay out, and talk. Like we would just get into whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like one of my best memories. Is that a random day could just turn into a full on adventure in my
That's
neighborhood.
that's how that's how it was in Ghana too. I feel like now, parenting and being a child is a little different. Like you can just go out and play.
Yeah.
Like the world has changed,
Yeah.
right? Where there are a lot of like dangerous people out there.
Mhm.
Human trafficking, child trafficking. So I think people have become more careful.
Yeah.
Where you can just go out and
Yes,
play.
I feel like, our generation, very independent, we're able to just kind of just explore and navigate more than I feel like kids nowadays do. They're very restricted in some ways. They're very free thinkers, like the generations after us. But I definitely feel like having that time where we could just explore definitely helped us with our independence.
Hmm. Did you grow up having siblings, or did you grow up with any siblings?
Yeah, I have one. Well, I technically have two siblings. But I grew up with one of them. I'm the youngest, so I have two older sisters. But I grew up with my older sister. So yeah, she's like a second mom to me.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
she's
What is the age difference between you and your sister?
just 3 years.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Okay. And you did mention that you technically have two
Yeah.
siblings. Would you
So
mind telling us about your other sibling?
Yeah, so my other sister, she's my sister on my dad's side. Excuse me, but she's like way older, like 53, way older.
Oh, okay.
And she lived in Norfolk too. So
Mm-hmm.
we have a good relationship. We're just not as close as my other sister because we
Mm-hmm.
grew up together because we had the same mom. So we're in the same household. But my other sister, she's older, like 53, but she's my sister on my dad's side.
Mm-hmm.
So she lives in Texas. So she just lived a full life. But so yeah, that's my other sister as well.
Mm. Did you grow up in a two-parent household, or how was it like?
No, I lived in a single parent household, so my mother raised me and my sister.
Mm-hmm.
But I am thankful to have a very active father in my life. So even though
Mm.
I didn't like live with my dad, he was very active. Made sure that we spent time. I spent weekends, holidays, breaks with him and stuff like that. My father and I like have a great relationship. He's like my best friend, I guess you could say. But yeah, my father was very active. So
Wonderful.
it was just one of those circumstances that my parents really didn't work out as a couple,
Yeah.
but my dad always made his effort to be in my life. So,
Okay. That is beautiful. That
yeah.
is beautiful to hear, because in some cases that that is not it. Is that once the relationship did not work,
Mhm.
um the child does take a big hit as well.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless, there will be a hit on the
Mhm.
child, mental, emotional,
Mhm.
but the fact that he was, active, so active in your life, that
Yeah.
that that's such a blessing.
Yeah. It
To
is.
have.
The older I get, the more I'm just grateful for it, because I realize how much of a blessing it is.
Was there any incident that you remember vividly that was like, this really made me feel sad or afraid or?
Mm, I don't think so. I don't think as a kid like there was anything that made me sad per
Mm,
se. Because ironically enough, I really didn't. Well, I guess like I was kind of sad my parents weren't together at
mm-hmm.
one point, but then the older I got, I think I was like maybe 10, I was like realized that I was so happy that they weren't together because my parents are the complete opposite. And I just couldn't imagine my parents like being together. My dad is very militant. He's retired army.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's very free spirited. She kind of just let me and my sister like really explore
Yeah.
ourselves. And so I was just like, I don't think that would have worked out in the household. So I would say that'd be like the one thing that kind of made me sad at one point, but then after a while, I'm like, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
How old were you when they separated?
I believe I was 5. Yeah, I was 5, so I was pretty young still. But
And how old were you when you actually noticed it?
I would say like maybe 7, because that's when my dad was like, I started to question it more. So I was like maybe
Mm,
7 is when I started to question it, and I believe that's around the time that he got married to his ex-wife, which was my stepmom at the time. So
mm.
that's when I really started to notice it.
Hmm. Are there any things from your childhood that you've carried with you till today?
I would say it's a couple of things. So, excuse me. My mother, she was hearing impaired and visually impaired.
Oh,
So my sister and I grew up having to learn sign language. So we both know sign language.
wow.
Yeah, but we both know sign language. But we also kind of had to act, as interpreters for our mom when
Mm,
she would have like certain, I don't know, meetings or whatever. My sister or I would have to show up and interpret for her, things of that nature. So kind of having to like navigate through that, and like my mother, of course, being that she was hearing impaired. In Virginia, she went to a school that was for hearing impaired and visually impaired people,
mm,
so I was always around uh, those people. And so you see like how people treat them. You kind of just see the treatment, right? So like even with my sister and I, being that our mother was hearing impaired, we'll just kind of notice how like people will treat her off the rip when they
and
realize.
you said she was hearing and visually impaired?
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so like we would just see how people would treat her. And so for me, I think that was like a big lesson for me in how you treat people and like how
Mm,
you judge them, because my mother to me was like one of the most intelligent people I know,
mm,
very intuitive as well. And so I'm like, my mother, when I say visually impaired, she could drive. It's just there was small things with her vision, but
mm,
so when people would be aware of that, it's like they would treat her differently or treat her like she was slow. And so my sister
mm,
would and I would always have to step in and being like, she's not dumb. Don't treat her that way. Just alter
mhm.
how you talk to her. Because even though she was hearing impaired, she could still hear you. You just have to speak up a little louder.
Oh, so she can still hear
She
you.
can hear you. Yeah, she
Can she
wasn't.
respond
Yeah,
back?
she can respond back. She can talk
Oh,
back. So
okay.
she wasn't like um a traditionally deaf person
Yeah.
to where like they can't hear you at all or
Yes.
can't talk.
Yes.
She could talk, she could hear you. You just have to speak up a little louder.
Yeah.
It'll take her a minute to process what you're saying because she has to read your lips or
Mm-hmm.
process everything. But we would just notice how people would treat her, and so
Mm,
for me, I think having to grow up with all of that, it definitely like shaped like how I treat people and how I interact with people, and also just being more mindful and like
mm,
understanding before you try to like judge somebody or treat them a certain way.
yeah. Wow. Did you grow up with a big family? Like, did you have any extended family influence in your life, or was it just, like your close knit family, mom, dad, siblings?
Yeah, it was kind of close knit in my grandparents, but it
Mm,
was really close knit. I have a big family. I just don't really like having connected with them. Like I have some cousins who I have like relationships with, but in terms of like influence,
mm-hmm,
it was really close knit. My mom, my sister, my dad, and my grandparents,
mm-hmm,
and my aunt and my uncle. But that's about it. That's just
mm.
really close, tight knit for me.
And now is it still that tightness, or
Yeah,
it's still that tightness?
yeah.
Do you like talk to your cousins? Do you visit each other and stuff like that?
We talk like when I go home to Virginia to visit, like I'll hang out with him, but it's not like it's close like maybe when we were younger. But I think because we are older and like two of my cousins, like our work is different, but it's similar in the same sense. Like one of my cousins do community work, and my father has a nonprofit back home in Virginia, so she works closely with my father. So we kind of talk and connect on those things,
Mm.
but that's about it.
Mm. Is that like now that you are an adult, looking back, would you have chosen the close knit family just the way it was, or would you desire to actually have your extended family be heavily part of your life?
I desire it. It's just that so on both ends it's interesting. My mom's side, they're kind of like standoffish. So my mother's side, I don't think that I could get the closeness with that side.
Mm-hmm.
On my father's side, I definitely could, but I mean my father's side, they're a little bit different. There was alcoholism, drug usage, a lot of like my extended cousins been in and out of jail. So that's part of the reason why it was always kind of hard to connect with my
Mm-hmm.
dad's side of the family or even build that because, I've had a lot of cousins who I was actually close with who are in jail. One of my favorite cousins, he passed away when I was super young due to gang violence. So it
Mm.
was a lot of things like that that happened in my family. But if I could choose, I definitely would want like closeness from the extended family because I do realize that community is important.
Mm.
Um, and like one thing for me, like if I decide to have kids, especially living out here with no family,
Mhm.
I would want to marry into somebody who has a big family so that
Mm.
way my kids can have that community because I realize that like that's part of like what makes us better as people is having that community
Mhm.
outside of like your close knit family, but the extended family, friends, things of that nature.
Mm. Talking about your father's family, where there was alcoholism and, drug usage and people going in and out of jail because of the way of life some of them were living, do you think that your parents intentionally shielded you from that?
Yeah, my dad definitely did. That's why I say it's interesting. Like depending on where I'm at, you'll see what side of me because
Mm.
my dad was definitely very militant, very structured. He really didn't want me to be exposed to anything. Unlike my mother was kind of like live your life,
Yeah.
like whatever you see, we'll come back and talk about it, but live your life.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it causes me to like have a delicate balance. There's some times where I'm very wild and free, and there's some times where I'm very just like very straightforward and like just focused because
Yeah.
of just that upbringing that I had. But my dad definitely tried to shield me from a lot, especially because of the things that my family was going through and like what they were experiencing.
Mm. Did you have a safe place when you were a child, knowing that you grew up in a single parent home? You have extended families that were in and out of jail, and these are people that probably or you've heard of,
Mhm.
hearing that, oh, this cousin of yours is going to jail and is back
Mhm.
and is gone again.
Mhm.
This person is using drugs. This person has been,
Mhm.
your favorite cousin being killed by
Mhm. Yeah.
gun violence. Like when you're a child and you were hearing all of these things and seeing all of this, what was your safe place or what was your safety net? Did you have any?
Um, I would say at the time it was reading. That was like my only safety net. I don't think I really had one like as a teenager.
Mm,
Um, and my dad would be sometimes,
mm,
but definitely like reading. I feel like that was like my one way to like zone out and just I would sit outside on my neighbor's like little swing and
mhm,
just read.
mm,
But that was kind of like my safety net at the time. It was like my
mm,
way to just kind of get away from the reality and zone out.
mm. At age 7, when you noticed that your parents are not together,
Hmm.
how did it make 7-year-old Candice feel? Or even like growing up until you were a teenager, how were you processing that?
I think on one end, it didn't make me feel. I feel like at one point it made me sad, um,
Why?
because so my mother she would like deal with domestic violence. So my sister and I had to
She
grow up kind
did
of seeing that with
deal.
my mother, with like some of the people that she dated.
Mm,
So on one hand, it was hard because when the reality that I had with my mother was different than the reality that I had with my father.
mm,
Um, And so at one point it did make me question like why do I have to see this and why can't my parents just be together? But again, as I got older, I kind of understood. But yeah, it definitely was kind of like hard at one point having especially like see my mother go through domestic violence as a kid and as a young girl. Um so yeah, it was kind of hard at first for me to like process that. Um but yeah, so I definitely feel like it made me sad, definitely confused. But on the other end, it definitely motivated me more as well to just really like be clear on like the future that I want for myself.
mm,
And type of the life that I wanted to provide for myself, and even if I had kids, like what I would want them to be exposed to and see.
mm. It's amazing the perspective you chose to have on the situation you had when you were young. I feel like everything in life is about perspective, right?
Mhm.
Because someone could have gone through the same thing you went through, like seeing a mother go through domestic violence and think that that is the definition of love,
Mhm.
or think that that is what partnership should look
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
or also think that maybe I'll choose not to have a partner
Right.
because when I have a man, this is how the man is going to treat
Yeah.
me. But you chose to think differently. Is that okay? This is what I've seen. I am going to try to not have a child see things like this. So, you chose a different route.
Hmm.
I feel like that is not the first thing to expect from someone who grew up seeing that.
Yeah, and I mean, I also attribute it to having my father around as well.
Mm.
Um, excuse me. But even though I was seeing all those things, I've also had a father who was in my ear, very affirming, very demanding at
Mm.
times, but like, you're smart, you gotta, he just always telling me, like, basically that I have to know how to defend myself and basically always rely on myself first before I rely on anybody else, especially a man. So my
Mm.
dad was always in my ear, like, you never want to give a man an upper hand to make him feel like he has any type of control over you. And as an adult, I feel like it's healthy, but it's not at the same time. But I understand what my dad was saying, but I also understood the intention behind it because my dad knew what I was seeing. And I think for him, he cared more about me being empowered within myself as a person, as a
Mhm.
woman, than anything else. And
Mm.
so I definitely feel like my father being in my ear around that time was also very helpful for me to stay focused. But then also, to my older sister was very adamant on the fact that I still continued to go to school no matter what was going on. My sister ended up dropping out of high
Mm.
school, I think ninth grade. She dropped out of high school. So my sister dropped out to like kind of stay at home to like be with my mom. But she always like made sure like you're going to school. Like
Mm.
my sister was very adamant about me still being set on having my future and not my future being altered because of our circumstances. So
Mm.
I definitely feel like those two factors definitely helped me have no choice but to have like a better perspective on everything that I had
Mm.
going on. And I think because my dad did a great job of actively showing up and being a good example of how a man is supposed to show up, it
Mm.
didn't affect me too bad.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. How was finances like growing up in your home? I mean, I remember you said that where you guys were living was like a income
Hmm.
place. Was that with your mom or with your dad?
With both,
Both.
but with
Okay.
my mom, being that she was hearing impaired,
Mm.
I don't know how we ended up in this neighborhood, but I grew up in like a neighborhood around old people. It was like a retirement home
Yes.
community. But yeah, it was a retirement home apartment community. But somehow we ended up there. I think because my mom was like, guess considered disabled. We ended up there. So the neighborhood I lived in was very quiet. I mean, it was a bunch of old
No
people.
trouble at
Yeah.
all.
But the surrounding neighborhoods were like houses. And so a lot of the people that I went to school with, like literally, if I hop over a gate, I'm in the other
Mm.
neighborhood where all my classmates and stuff were. So that's
Oh.
why I guess you could say it was middle class.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's how it was. And then with my dad, it was kind of middle class too. He has owned his own house, lives in a neighborhood in Norfolk. It was an up and coming neighborhood, but yeah, so
Hmm.
I got it on both ends.
Do you think that growing up in the neighborhood you grew up in contributed to like the woman you are today? Like considering the fact that in your mother's neighborhood it was like pretty much quiet and calm and
Mhm.
everything, because you have such a calming
Yeah.
effect. Like I'm not know if I'm not sure if I'm the only one who has said
No,
this,
I
but
hear it all the
you
time.
have such a calming effect. I think your personality is just naturally calm. I've never
Yeah.
seen you hyper. I'd love to
Yeah.
see you hyper. Maybe we should give you a little alcohol.
Yeah.
But I've never seen you hyper. You have such a calming effect on every occasion I've met
Mhm.
you. So do you think that perhaps a bit of your personality was influenced by the neighborhood you grew up in?
Yeah, I mean, it was just very calm and laid back. I mean, I didn't grow up in like in a very chaotic neighborhood. I mean, I've been in chaotic environments because of my family and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the stuff that I've been through at home. But like overall, like it was just calm. So I do feel like a lot of that goes into it. I'm currently in therapy trying to figure out if me being calm is a trauma response or if this is a real personality trait. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know because I can get very feisty and wild at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
but my default is just to be calm
Yeah.
and chill. But I think because of like the neighborhood I grew up in, it's just been laid back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think I definitely resonate with that. People have told me that I have this calming effect as
Yeah.
well, but I can be feisty and
Yeah.
wild. Don't be fooled.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. I'm like, it's
Don't
just a
be-
side of me.
and I can be feisty and wild without alcohol.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. It just depends on the mood. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the mood. It depends on where we are and the people that
Yeah.
I'm around,
Yeah.
and sometimes they'll bring that out on me.
Yeah, I think because of the work that I do, it's just my default to be calm.
Mm.
But I mean, if I'm around friends, I just, it just depends.
Mm. How old were you when you saw your mother, going through abuse? Because I
Hmm.
feel like it's very hard for us to see people we love, not to talk about mothers, mothers that are supportive. Like when you have a very supportive, loving mother, it can be very hard on us to see them go through hard times.
Hmm.
So how old were you, and could you process it at that? Did you know it was abuse?
I think I was like 5 when I first saw it, like when it first happened. At the time, I didn't know it was abuse, but I knew it was wrong. It didn't feel right. But at the same time, even at a young age, I kind of understood why it was happening to my mom because she didn't really feel confident within herself.
Mm,
The thing about my mother, she's a very beautiful woman. Everybody who's known her, who met her when she was here, would always talk about how good she looked. She dressed nice, carried herself very well. So, but I think because my mother was hearing impaired and visually impaired, for
mm,
her, she didn't feel like she was smart.
mm,
And so, therefore, unfortunately, she dealt with people that took advantage of that or, just saw that as a vulnerability. Um, and so I knew it wasn't right. But I also knew that if my mother could know how confident or smart that she was, that she wouldn't be in those situations. But
mm,
unfortunately, I don't think she had the proper community around her to kind of empower her, especially because she was deaf and not, traditionally people don't really know much about deaf people, things of
mhm,
that nature. And so I think her family just really didn't know how to like uplift her in
mhm,
that sense.
mm, mm. And so 5-year-old, you started seeing that, and you knew that that's not how it's supposed to be. Um, well, I'm thinking that you knew that because that was not all you were supposed to, because you will go and visit your father and
Mhm.
you saw something totally different,
Mhm.
that your
Mhm.
father didn't treat a woman like that.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing that's where you learned it from, that
Yeah.
a man shouldn't be treating a woman this way.
Yeah. It was a power thing. I noticed that very at the time, of course I didn't know it, but
Mm-hmm.
as an adult I can see it and say that it was a power thing. It was kind of like one of those ways that men was trying to insert their power because even though my mother was like very beautiful, she was very feisty. She'll
Mm-hmm.
definitely tell you about yourself, like, and that's one thing my mom never did was back down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think also too it was just the power thing. I think um when you deal with a man who's not fully empowered within themselves, and as a woman, if you don't know your power, a man can see that and they'll try to take it away from you. And so I always seen it as a power play. But because I didn't have that environment with my dad to where, he empowered me, I knew it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could feel what place it was coming from for them.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely was a power thing.
Perhaps did you ever like speak up to your mom or your dad or your sister about this situation?
I don't think I've ever spoke up. I think I spoke up to my mom like maybe once about it. She
How
was
old
very
were you?
defensive. I probably think like maybe 10, 11,
Mm,
probably. Definitely spoke up to my mom about it, but she was really defensive about it. So of course it didn't go anywhere. But other than that, I don't think I've ever like brought it up as a
mm,
kid
yeah.
to my family. As I got older, of course, I kind of had conversations with my mom about it and my sister and my dad about it. But growing up, I really didn't talk
Mm,
about it.
yeah. And how long did this go on for?
Um, I would say from like 5 to maybe like 12.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I turned 12, it changed. She started dating somebody. And so it just, we didn't deal with it no more.
Mm,
Um, yeah, but unfortunately, even though she didn't deal with it, she dated the guy for a while, I think for like maybe 15 years. But unfortunately, my mother passed away due to domestic violence. Somebody murdered her. So it was somebody that she dated after the guy that she dated for a while.
Oh,
So unfortunately, she had to endure that before she passed away.
so sorry to hear that, Candice.
Thank you. So yeah, it was unfortunate, but I was able to like I don't know. It was just very mind. It was a very can't think of the word I'm trying to say. It was something that I had to like learn. I feel like being that I'm growing into a woman, I got to kind of see and just really understand everything my mom was experiencing and leading up to her passing.
Mm, mm. I heard you say you are seeing a therapist and all of that, which I think is amazing. I think that therapy is one of the greatest gifts we can give to ourselves. What took you into therapy?
I started when I first moved here, actually. So I've been here for 9 years now
In
in
Atlanta?
Georgia, yeah.
Mm.
So when I first moved here, I just kept having mental breakdowns and I just couldn't figure out like what was going on.
When you have a mental breakdown, what does it look like?
Um, just in my head a lot,
Mm.
and to the point where like it was I felt like I couldn't do anything. Like
Mhm.
I was on autopilot. All I had the energy for was to go to work and go home. That was it.
Mm.
So for me, like when I have a mental breakdown, typically I shut everybody out. I don't talk to nobody. I'm just really to myself. I think I started going to therapy like maybe 2 years after I moved here. And the reason why is because like on the outside looking in, everything was perfect. When I moved here, 6 months after I moved here, my ex husband and I bought a house. We got married a year after. So I'm like, I have everything I'm asking for, and I don't
Mhm.
understand why I'm so miserable.
Mhm.
And so that's what made me start going to therapy. It was
Mhm.
just like process and really figure out like why wasn't I happy. I moved here because I wanted to start a business. There was things that I wanted to do, but I just felt like I couldn't do it. So I really started to go to therapy to try to break down what those blockages were for me. So that's what started it. And I've been off and on. So, of course, as of lately, I've started going back again just to kind of process not only like the grieving that I had to go through, but also how can I navigate as a woman. There are certain things that I've experienced that I've learned, and trying to learn how to like work through those things, but still show up as a woman and also as a business owner, as someone who's trying to get to the next level, accomplish your dreams and goals, just how to really navigate with all of those things.
Mm.
So
Mm. Growing up, did you have a relationship with your grandparents?
I did, yeah. Yeah, but my grandparents, I feel like they're like the traditional grandparents where they're not emotional. So it's like, I can call them and talk to them,
Mhm.
but like in terms of closeness, there's no real
Yeah.
closeness. But like what we have is what they consider close, but there's like no emotional
Oh.
connection, things of that nature. Like I can't call them crying because they'll probably be like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. They
um
wouldn't probably know what to tell you.
right, yeah, they wouldn't really know how to like properly show up,
Mm.
but I definitely am close with them in a
Mm.
sense.
Mm. Let's talk about your life in school. Young Candice in a home where you have to go, you know, between your father and your mother, but you mainly live with your mother, correct?
Mhm,
That's what I'm getting.
mhm,
All right. And then you were living with your mother and you're seeing your mother go through all of this abuse.
mhm,
And of course, I'm sure you were too young to even process. I'm sure you didn't even know that was like you didn't know what it was, but you
mhm,
just knew it wasn't good.
mhm.
When you go to school, or did you have friends whom you thought at that time were from perfect homes?
Mhm.
And did you ever like compare yourself to them? Like what will go through your mind when you look at the home that you have and then the home that was perfect, that looked perfect with your friends?
I mean, it was always just one of those like, why can't that be me? Like
Mm.
situations. I had one friend. I was close with him and his sister, and I would always go to their house. Well, like they'll have sleepovers and stuff, pool parties, and I would just be like, why can't this be my life? And I just loved it. But I don't know. After a while, I just stopped comparing myself because I'm like, it's not much you could do, and really just try to focus on what I could do to enjoy the life that I had. I mean, because eventually it did get better. So just after a while, I just stopped comparing myself. It was just like, just enjoy what you have and Fortunately, I don't know if it was fortunate, unfortunately, nobody could ever tell that I had all that stuff going on in my house, right?
Mm,
Like people thought that I did have two parents. Like I went to elementary school, middle school, high school with the same people
mm,
practically. And it took for them to get to high school. Some of them didn't even know I lived in an apartment until I got to high school. And they were like, I thought you lived in the house this whole time. I'm like, no. So it was like a lot of those things where people didn't even know like
mm,
the life that I had, or they thought that I was living life similar to them. So in my head, I was just like, well, can't compare because I'm like, you don't even look like,
mm-hmm.
where you're actually coming from. So I was like, just keep showing up the best way you can.
Mm. But was it really a thing back then, like living in a house versus living in an apartment?
I believe so because a lot of my like people peers that I grew up with, they all grew up in
Mm-hmm.
houses. So I didn't really
Oh.
realize it was a thing. But when my classmates would be like, "Oh, I didn't know you lived in an apartment," I'm like, "Well, what's the difference? Like, it's a home. It's a home. It's a home."
Mm.
So I mean, I guess where I came from, it was a thing.
I see. I didn't know that. Now that you are an adult, some of these things that you saw growing up, like the gun violence, hearing that your cousin was killed, your mother was murdered, having seen what your mother went through, in terms of abuse. I know that you have chosen differently, you have made
hmm
different choices, but has any of that affected you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in terms of like how I connect with people definitely is. I'm not judgmental, but I'm definitely very mindful of like who I'm connecting with, who I keep around me very close
Mhm.
in terms of closeness. Um, on the other end, I think for me as a woman, it definitely makes me more mindful of the importance of independency
Mhm.
um, and being able to just be very selective of who you choose as a partner.
Mhm.
I think I got to see firsthand that the wrong partner could really alter your life. And so for me, it definitely makes me more intentional about who I would choose moving forward, like to have a partnership with. But it definitely altered me in some ways. But I have to actively work through like being open, being vulnerable
Mm.
with people because I know that I have to trust myself too in my discernment with all of that, and that I can't let things that I saw growing up affect me because I have to trust the fact that God gave me a discernment to allow me to navigate through life and still be open hearted, being open minded.
Mm.
So it definitely affected me, but it's a lot of work that I have to do to
Mhm.
delicately balance through navigating through life every
Mm.
day.
Did you experience any of the abuse firsthand, or was your mother able to protect you from it?
She was able to protect me from it.
Mm.
Thank God.
Wonderful. Let's talk about your mom passing away. Were you here when it happened? Were you in Atlanta?
hmm
Mm.
Yeah.
When your mother passed away, did you hear the news and did it tell you how she passed away altogether, or you heard one before the other?
One before the other. So it was what, like 2 days after Thanksgiving, my uncle called me and basically just said my mother passed away. And no, my aunt, excuse me, my aunt called me and just said my mom passed away. And of course I didn't know why. So I called my sister. My sister didn't know why either. And so we called our uncle, and then he was the one who told us how she passed away, which, basically told us that she got murdered. And so, yeah, my sister and I was just on the phone bawling. I called my father, and we all just were, talking. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning when I found out. So from 1 o'clock in the morning till that next day, I was just up,
Yeah.
just trying to like process everything.
She got murdered by a man she was with.
hmm Well, she was with him. They were broken up at the time, but
They had broken up at the time.
hmm yeah.
When you heard that news, because for me, I realized that there are certain things that I've experienced in my childhood, and some of those things triggers me,
hmm
even though I'm healing
hmm
um, from them. I still realize that sometimes it's still a trigger.
hmm
Like one of them is finances for
hmm
me,
hmm
is that I grew up in a family where I didn't lack anything. But the moment my mother died, I only had my father. And I got to know my father, my biological father, at the age of 15 or 16.
Mm.
And he lived in the US and I was in Ghana. I realized that I didn't have as much
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I was lacking more, and all of that. So I began to depend on some people. And sometimes it's almost as if they'll be demanded. I remember a man forcefully hugging me
Mm.
in his car. And this was a man who was in film. I remember we went for a meeting or whatever, and we were coming back, and him in his car, because I was in college at that time. And he wasn't my friend, but kind of like a friend. I was the women's commissioner for my college at that time. And so I was leading a female film contest. And so I had to find sponsorship for it. And so he was willing to sponsor. So that's how come I knew him. So we kind of became like friends, not like very close friends, but he was also older than me. So not just a friend, but someone that I could learn from, you know. And I remember vividly that I accompanied him to a meeting. It was kind of like a business meeting. And then he was coming to drop me back at my hostel. And he was giving me money in the car. And then he told me, he said, I know you don't like this. If I ask you, I know that you will not do it. So I'm just going to hug you anyways. And he forcefully hugged me, in the car. That was just all he did.
Yeah.
But I know it was just a hug. But the fact that it was forced,
Yeah.
the fact that
Yeah.
he told me that I know you don't want it.
Right.
So I'm not
Still.
going to ask you, and I feel like the reason he came to visit me that day was because I remember we were talking. I was like, oh, I'm broke. Like it's like one of those older friends you have in your life that
Right.
you can just talk to about anything. Like, oh, I'm broke. Like college students, we're always
Yeah.
broke. So I associate that with depending on him. So the reason I went to accompany him for the meeting, because he came to me and was like, oh, I came to visit you. I'm going for a meeting. Do you want us to go to the meeting and come back? So we did go to the meeting. So I feel like if I wasn't broke, he wouldn't have visited me, and then I wouldn't have,
Right.
accompanied him to the meeting. He wouldn't have hugged me forcefully, right? And then other stuff as well. Like sometimes I'll struggle to pay my hostel fees, stuff like that. So for me, accommodation and finances are very important to me because when I lost my mother, I lost a sense of home. I didn't kind of have a home anymore. And then I realized that because I didn't have money, a place to stay became a problem as well when I was in college because I didn't want to stay with family.
Right.
I tried staying with family and it was just too much for my mental and emotional health. So I decided to move away, like not stay with any family member. So anytime, even till now, anytime I'm in a place in my life where I'm not financially stable, I panic. I panic. The moment I'm not financially stable or the moment like my income is not going a certain way, I panic. I begin to think that, oh, I'm going to be homeless or I'm not going to have money. I have to depend on people. The thought of depending on people scares me.